There is a version of you that moves through life like water, steady, unstoppable, and effortless. But right now, you don't feel like water. You feel like a dam, stuck, heavy, waiting for the right moment that never comes. Ancient China had a name for this paralysis of the spirit. They called it resisting the Tao, resisting the natural flow of your own life. And Lao Tzu taught that resisting your path is the fastest way to lose yourself. Today, we're going to break the habit that quietly destroys your potential. Procrastination through the Taoist method of Wu Wei. There is a modern character we all recognize. He wakes up with pressure already sitting on his chest. Responsibilities, dreams, expectations. He keeps telling himself, "I'll start soon." But soon becomes later, later becomes tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes a quiet confession. "I don't know why I can't just begin." He's convinced the problem is motivation or discipline or some missing burst of energy he hopes will appear out of nowhere. But Taoism sees his struggle differently. It's not that he's weak, it's that he's trying to force himself, and the mind resists force the way a tree resists a storm. It bends the wrong way, it tightens, it breaks. Lao Tzu would simply ask him, "Why are you fighting yourself?" Procrastination isn't a failure of discipline, it's a failure of flow. In ancient China, the sages observed nature endlessly. They watched how rivers carve mountains, how bamboo survives storms while stronger trees snap. They realized something radical. Nature never forces effort, yet it accomplishes everything. This became the principle of Wu Wei, not doing nothing, but acting without inner resistance, movement without friction, effort that doesn't feel like effort. Water doesn't hesitate, it doesn't negotiate, it doesn't say, "I'll flow later." It moves continuously, quietly, without drama. When you procrastinate, Taoism says you're not mismanaging your time, you're misaligning with your nature. Inside you, there's a quiet war, a biological war. Part of your mind seeks progress, but an older part seeks comfort and familiarity. That's why beginning any task feels threatening. Taoism doesn't call this weakness, it calls it disharmony. When the mind is divided, Lao Tzu would say, movement becomes impossible. Modern people try to overcome procrastination by force, guilt, pressure, deadlines, promises. But force creates resistance, and resistance feeds the war. The Taoist approach is different. Stop fighting, start aligning. But what does aligning look like in the real world? Think about the moment before you start a task. There is a tightness in your chest, a whisper of fear, a small voice saying, "Not yet, it's too much." Taoism says this is the ego, the false self, clinging to comfort because comfort feels like control. But water has no ego. It doesn't ask whether the path is easy or hard, it simply flows. And because it keeps moving, obstacles soften, resistance dissolves, and progress appears natural. If you could watch yourself from the outside, you'd see that your potential is not blocked by difficulty. It's blocked by hesitation. Wu Wei demands a truth that most people never realize. The task is not the enemy. Your resistance to the task is. You don't need more energy. You need less friction. The Taoist way is to shrink the beginning until the mind stops resisting. Start with the smallest action, the one so light your brain doesn't perceive threat. This is how water wins, not by power but by constant, gentle movement. The modern mind hates this. It wants dramatic transformation, a heroic surge of motivation. But Lao Tzu reminds us, the great appears as the small. The difficult begins in the easy. Imagine a student staring at a blank page for hours. He believes writing an entire essay is too overwhelming. But Taoism would ask him to write just one sentence, not because it's enough, but because that single sentence lowers the internal wall. Once he writes one, the next appears. Momentum is born, Action becomes its own motivation. The student wasn't incapable. He was stuck behind a wall he built in his own mind. Wu Wei tears that wall down by bypassing it entirely. To live Wu Wei, you follow a rule older than psychology itself. Move like water, without gaps. A river doesn't flow for one day and stop the next. Its power comes from its continuity. Behavioral science agrees. Consistency rewires identity. Tiny actions create momentum. Momentum dissolves resistance. Your task isn't to finish everything today. It's to keep the river moving. A single sentence, 5 minutes of study, a small step toward your goal. Not for achievement, but for flow. The ancient sages didn't react to obstacles. They anticipated them. Before storms, bamboo bends. Before winter, creatures gather. Before conflict, generals prepare strategies. Taoists called this pre-deciding. If you know distractions will tempt you, remove them. Buy beforehand. If mornings overwhelm you, prepare your environment the night before. If motivation will fail, and it will, create a ritual that bypasses willpower entirely. Chinese scholars had a practice before writing. Clear the desk, settle the breath, straighten the posture. They didn't wait for focus, they prepared for it. Preparation is not force. Preparation creates flow. And then something begins to happen, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly at first. The task that once felt intimidating begins to feel natural. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop performing mental gymnastics to avoid beginnings. You move through your days with an inner softness, yet an unmistakable strength. You become someone who acts without drama, without dread, without emotional turbulence. And this is the essence of Taoist mastery. Not the loud, heroic discipline of warriors, but the silent, unbroken movement of water. You begin to see procrastination for what it is. A story you were telling yourself. A habit of resistance. A misunderstanding of your own nature. Taoism doesn't ask you to become stronger. It asks you to become clearer. Clarity dissolves fear. Clarity dissolves hesitation. Clarity brings flow. There comes a moment, after days or weeks of small, uninterrupted movement, when you realize something has shifted. You no longer dread beginnings. Tasks no longer feel like enemies. Procrastination loses its grip because the river inside you has begun to move again. And in that movement, you meet a new version of yourself. Calmer, more aligned, less frantic, less dramatic. Someone who doesn't fight life but walks with it. When you stop resisting, Lao Tzu taught, you become unstoppable. You don't conquer procrastination. You dissolve it. You return to your nature. You return to the Tao. You return to the still current within you. If this philosophy resonates with you, subscribe for more lessons from Lao Tzu and the path of the still current.